Imagine a conscious contact with God so strong that no matter what you are doing or not doing, that no matter what your kids are up to or not up to, and that whether you've got the person of your dreams or they're just not cooperating, that you are happy, content, and at peace. A space where everyone else's thoughts, attitudes, and actions are beautiful and exactly as they are supposed to be. Well, this is the space where I like to play. My name is Misha Z, and this is today's Bitch Slap. Join me as I shed light on the thoughts, actions, and attitudes that are causing you pain, and we train our minds to go to the capital S inner self, the joy that is waiting for us, the God within.
Thank you for taking the leap and joining me. I'm going to just say the name again, Adam Reed, for joining me on the Bitch Slap podcast. And just as a reminder, the Bitch Slap is about those times when the universe shakes you a little bit and is like, hey, change your perception. I'm out here. What are you doing? And hopefully we can shorten that pain loop. So we'll when we can come back to that thought loop or that idea. But I was writing down notes, and I believe the last time we were hanging out was probably 3 years ago by now, 4 years ago. What is that time frame?
Yeah, about right. 2016, 2017. Yeah.
Yeah. And then before that, we'd sort of bumped into each other maybe 10 years before that or something like that. Or
Yeah. And if I may, I'll interject because I knew Misha pre-Bitch Slap.
Yeah.
When we used to work out together at used to work out at the same place, which was Cardiff Fit.
Yes.
And you used to come in with, I think, I don't know if it's coiffed or coiffed, but you had your perfectly coiffed hair. I think you used to work out in your wingtips. Like you were all about business, man. And, and it's cool because then we got to know each other on a deeper level after you had gone through your own transformation. And as an observer of wingtip Misha and, the spiritually bitch slapped Misha.
Yeah.
I could see the transformation. I can attest to that. So
yeah, that's very cool. And I think when we bumped into each other the second time, it was a profound moment for me. So thank you for that. When you're like, wow, you really have changed a lot. And I think, as you know, sometimes we don't see it in ourselves right away.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I want to tell you how I don't know how much if I've ever expressed this to you, but round 2, when we met in 16 or 17 or what it was, how influential you were in my life as far as the continued progress for me.
Amen.
And I would say even then it was very interesting. I was writing down, one of the things I wrote down was our egoic battle. And and it was, for me, it was like, with you, I wanted to be seen a certain way, and definitely with the outside world, I wanted to be seen a certain way. And you definitely challenged that in me with the literature that you were recommending that I would read. Right. You're like, hey, Mish, I know you think you're in tune here, but there's a much bigger world out there. Does that resonate or sound familiar? Or
yeah, hopefully I wasn't that hardcore, but it's a good point. I think I've been a bit of a gadfly, I think is the term, which works really good for coaching. Because people give me permission to hold them to a higher standard. It's all kind of baked in. But it can be difficult because you're right. The ego is not our amigo. And, I'm somebody, for better or worse, am like congenitally hardwired to kind of speak truth or at least challenge things. And again, it works great in certain contexts and it doesn't work so great in other contexts. So I'm glad it worked well in our context.
Yeah. And I think too, I don't mean to make it sound like you were in my face challenging me, but it was more of like, oh, wow, you're really going through this growth spurt or this phase. So you're like, hey, here's 2 books, or here's this author. I recommend these books. And it was out of nowhere, out of contention or anything like that. It was just like, hey, you're in it. Like, read this. It will, right? And
Good, man. Well, that's even better. And I know which book you're referring to, and a friend had turned me onto it. And I've suggested that book to no fewer than 100 people. Obviously, you're talking about the surrender experiment. For one.
absolutely, Michael Singer and the go ahead, go on.
Yeah, and that book was recommended to me by a friend who's pretty high up in the whole personal development space. And, I sat there and read it, and it was like an out of body experience. I mean, because he articulated through his own narrative what it's like to just lean in, and it's much easier said than done. So I'm glad that you like that book. I had a buddy who I knew when I was in China. He's in Malta now, and he just sent me, I just all of a sudden I opened my phone, I have a screenshot of the surrender experiment on our WhatsApp, and we hadn't talked about it. Maybe he picked it up somewhere or another. I think he said he saw it on my Facebook, but it's a deep book. It's changed many a life.
Well, tell me more about that for you and your experience with it and how it, and the leaning in bit. I like that. Go on more about that.
Yeah, man. Well, so it's, there's a diagram I use with my coaching clients. It's, and I've been using it for a while, and I didn't come up with it. I don't know where I found it, but it's a Venn diagram. So you've got two overlapping circles. On the left side is discipline, which was always a big part of my coaching, about habits and 22 days to 66 days to turn something, from a headwind to a tailwind, and that process of resistance and going through no man's land until it becomes automated, which is difficult because we're our constant companion, and our brains are really good at coming up with the perfect excuse to pull back, to abort, before it really gets locked in. So discipline is the circle on the left side. Then the circle on the right side is surrender. And then overlapping is flow, to borrow from Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, the book Flow, where you're just at the edge of your abilities, where time stops. Michael Pollan talks about it. He's got 5 criteria of what it means to be in flow. And that surrender part's pretty interesting because of the hardwiring where, our ego likes to be in control. It likes to be right. It's very good at justifying, self-justifying. I was working with a client this morning, and we were talking a little bit about that. He's a pretty well-known guy. He's an author. And I don't want to say too much because I don't want to put anything that would identify him. Yeah. But he's doing one profession, and his passion is writing. And the resistance that's come up with that. So a big part of my methodology is you build a foundation of habits, starting with waking early, some best practices like getting exercise, the endorphins, the blood flowing, and then to do the one thing early in the day that makes everything else easier or unnecessary, which is whatever the priority is. By its very definition, it's the most important thing that you could be doing, not necessarily busy work. And it's amazing. The closer you get to your soul's calling, and I'm sure you've experienced this in what you're doing now. Who is it? It's the guy that wrote the book, The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield. Yeah. And he talks about resistance. The closer you get to your soul's calling, the greater the resistance. And so
let me ask you, hold that thought there. So what was the thing you said again? It's do the first thing in the morning that what?
So wake early and then get into your, exercise. And then the one thing is get into the one thing that makes everything else easier or unnecessary.
Okay? Or unnecessary. Okay. Love that.
It's a little out of the box, but it's basically, we're habituated to do certain things, however, whatever it is, whatever routine that we've been conditioned into. And a lot of times somebody else will come. There's a cool story. A guy told me this when I was 18 about.
So hold that story, hold that thought. So tell me your writer client, what would be an example of something for him that he would do first thing that would make other things unnecessary?
Well, in his case, he's a writer, so he would write before the day came in. So in Pressfield's book, the War of Art, Pressfield was kind of a ne'er-do-well into his mid-40s. And then he ended up writing a screenplay, Tin Cup, I think it was, and a couple military novels. And he's well-known. He's written this book that many, many people refer to. And he said, I only write when inspiration strikes, which fortunately for me is every morning at 7:30 a.m. when I sit at my keyboard.
Okay.
He'd habituated it, and it was the most important thing that he could be doing, and the very thing that he spent 20 years of his life avoiding doing. And so he habituated. So it was the closer you get to your soul's calling, the greater the resistance. And in his case, and in my client's case, if he's a writer, what do writers do? Writers write. But what do most writers and what do most creatives do? They find out everything that they can do instead of writing because the resistance is so great. Hemingway talked about clearing out his refrigerator in order for him to be able to write, because the call of going into the refrigerator to get a snack.
Dude, I love that.
Yeah.
What about how does that apply to you? What's the thing in your day that you're like, if I could knock this out, it would make everything else irrelevant or unnecessary? I love that.
Yeah, man, it's profound. So I have always kind of been I don't know what you'd call it, a bit of a maverick, somebody who marches to the beat of my own drummer. So you know my background. I was
I can't wait to talk about it. Or go now if you want to dive deep.
We can use that as hooks to circle back to. But I was in Washington D.C. I was working as a sales rep in the healthcare industry, selling health insurance, and I was in my late 20s. I was pretty successful at it, and I had a calling to cash in my chips, and I got a one-way ticket to Casablanca, Morocco. And without really a plan, just a backpack, I got my one-way ticket, stayed with a friend's family. It was all just basically leaning in, surrendering without even realizing it, to the warm embrace of the universe, where there was no anchors, there was no plan, there was no routine.
Yeah.
And I was 31, almost 32 when I made that leap of faith. And then I spent the next year backpacking around the world. I got to China, where I lived for about 4 years, working, studying, living, learning the language. And then I came back to the States for a job in 2011, which is how you and I met. Corporate job, sales job, brought me to San Diego, which is someplace I'd never been, but I wanted to be. And so, again, there was a bit of a surrender, and it was on the back end of, to borrow your nomenclature, a bitch slap. I got bitch slapped by life after China, went down to Thailand to kind of lick my wounds, had a very profound experience where I, was essentially brought to my knees in a way where I raised the white flag of surrender, and thereby got my first real taste of what it meant to surrender as a gateway into a life that was better than the one that I concocted on my own out of no other choice. Yes. I ran out of options. And I know you both know what that's about. And so I came back to America, came to San Diego, worked a job in an industry I knew nothing about, just through a friend of mine back in the day, excelled at it, did very well, started the coaching thing as kind of a side hustle.
When did the Michael Singer book come into play for you, the Surrender Experiment? What year or when?
16, probably around the time I mentioned it to you. So I started.
Okay.
Yeah. So I came to San Diego 2011, started the coaching thing as kind of a lark in 2015.
Okay.
A buddy of mine had turned me on to that Surrender Experiment, which became, one of the primary kind of foundational touchstones. So yeah, it was a few years after I had surrendered without realizing what was going on.
Yeah. Okay. So you're 2016-ish, you're into that book, loving it. And it's like, it's helping you frame what has happened to you. And you're like, oh, maybe I can even go deep. I can purposefully surrender on a how could I say it? You could almost use it as a tool, right?
Yeah.
The idea of it.
It's deep stuff, Misha. On one hand, resistance is futile.
Yes.
Right? I mean, life's going to happen. And if we live long enough to tell the tale, there's going to be gain. There's going to be loss. I mean, obviously, I love it because I've worked with a lot of younger clients, some, pretty well-known influencers. Yeah. In fact, I'm working with the client now, relatively young guy, super smart computer programmer, just got a job with a big tech company in the Bay Area. And he's 22, making a bunch of money. And the fourth book in the series that I work with my clients with is the Surrender Experiment. And it's a little interesting having this discussion with a 22-year-old.
Yes.
It's not my first rodeo. So I've coached about 400 clients. Some, 16-year-old was probably the youngest. Several that were in their mid-20s, a lot of the millennial influencers. And I'll talk about the Surrender Experiment. And some of these folks I've worked with for 2 or 3 years, and they won't really know what I'm talking about. But after about 6 months or a year of life, well, they get opportunities where life throws them a curveball. They thought everything was one way, and all of a sudden things happen. The last year for everybody, think about all these Fortune 500 CEOs in 2019, sitting around the boardroom table, doing their projections, talking to, whatever, McKinsey or Accenture and the quants and this and that, and then COVID comes by. Like, who saw that one? It didn't matter the best laid plans of mice and men.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So surrender is is a constant. Whether we go, and the real key, of course, is do we go along with that willingly or not? And to the
Yeah,
extent
love
we
that.
do, we have a commensurate, equal level of suffering that goes along.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's so many cool, I think with the COVID for me, the pandemic, it was really awesome for me to cease fighting quicker. I could cognitively, I don't know if that's the right word, or I was a step back from it and could see myself being like, okay, this is surrender, and literally I could name three things where it was like, okay, it shined a light on my economic insecurity, that fear of economic insecurity, right? That illusion of it. So I got to, it like stripped away new layers of that. I was like, so it's beautiful. It was painful because it might have whacked some of my net worth, but whatever. I'm free. I'm free, right? That's the goal, be free of mind.
Yeah.
And then the another one was it really, as my habits changed around how I could interact with people on a physical level, meaning like your work meetings are in person, right? Or you're meeting people at restaurants or whatever communities I'm involved in, there's all this face to face. And I really became very apparent very quickly my need for my compulsion and addictive need for adoration, validation. There was something else in there that I've forgotten, but I'm sure the spotlight will shine back on it. But really, the COVID and the forcing of the Zoom culture for me really has freed me of so much. I was like, oh my gosh, I compulsively need validation. And not so much anymore. Anyway, sorry about that little tangent, but those are some of the things for me. And right away, it was like, gosh, I'm uncomfortable. Like, what is it? Oh, here it is. Anyway.
It's great, man. Good stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
man. It's funny, this, when you get stripped down to the bare necessities, you realize how strong you are and what you can do without. I've been mentioning clients. A new guy just came on board, and we worked together for about a year and a half. And he ran, in the course of our working together, a bunch of good things happened. And one of his goals was to do $100 million in business, which would net him $1 million in income.
Yeah.
And he let me know that he got it about a year ago. We'd stopped working together about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then he went through a divorce and a bunch of other things happened. And so the great irony is all these things that people do to kind of, provide a castle around them, with the money, with the adoration. It's the ultimate illusion. And especially when there is wreckage created in the pursuit of it, because not only does it never fill that hole that people thought that it would, it's especially disappointing when a lot of work and effort went into it and it was a big milestone.
Yes.
And, it's just, the business of being a human being, or the nature, or the whatever, the exercise of being a human being. It's funny because we all get just kind of self-deluded depending on where we're at or what we, emphasize as being important to us. And, on the positive side, we can adapt pretty quickly when that stuff is removed. And usually because we identify with it, it comes with pain. But if we're still around, it can be some of the most liberating sense that we get, that we can get when we're still there without that stuff.
Absolutely. COVID's been the best thing that's happened to me, and it's been amazing. Honestly, I'm freer than I've ever been. I actually, the isolation effect of it has been profound for me. I was like new levels of being comfortable with myself in my own skin.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic, Did you ever read The Untethered Soul? I'm assuming you did.
Oh yeah. Both. I first read Surrender, and then I read Untethered Soul shortly after that, which, Surrender Experiment was a narrative. It was his life story. Untethered Soul went deep in the philosophy. My favorite chapter is probably, and I've shared this with a lot of clients as well. I did a voiceover. It's, I think it's chapter 2, My Inner Roommate. And he, through the narrative in Surrender Experiment and through the exposition, whatever the word is, of the philosophy in Untethered Soul. It's deep. It's about as deep as you get. So
Yeah.
yes, I've read it.
Yeah, I love it. I think my experience with both definitely with the Surrender Experiment, I would recommend anybody that has not read it to absolutely read it. So thank you again for that recommendation. My experience as well with it was there was the palpable in the mirror, in the moment experience as I'm reading it, but then like for the next year, it was very these palpable again that these moments of like, oh my gosh, stuff like subconsciously embedded itself in me, and then it would come up in these moments, and it's really awesome. So I love that. Tell me, the Untethered Soul. What else? I was going to say, tell me about other books. You mentioned a couple other ones. What's your sort of favorite book or two that you're kind of diving into right now?
Gosh, man, good question. I'm always reading, or at least listening to various books. A couple classics that have helped through this COVID experience. As a Man Thinketh.
Through the COVID experience, is that what
Yeah,
yeah.
because we were locked down. We had a pretty.
So let me just say real quick too. Other notes that I have for you, and I liked your maverick statement. I mean, you're on a constant state of adventure, traveling. I have a note of all over the East at different points in your life, and now you're in full expat mode. You're an expat, right? Stationed in Panama with that beautiful view that we saw. So go on with your thought. I just wanted to frame it for people so they knew.
So, a book that helped. So, I've been here about 2 years. I came here, I quit my corporate job, went all in on the coaching, came here in February, almost 2 years ago next month. 2 years ago next month. And sight unseen, flew to Panama.
Not to apply pressure, could you speak a little bit more into the mic or maybe pull it forward a little bit?
Yeah, you bet.
Perfect.
So what was the question, Misha?
Oh yeah. Excuse me. Book. Like you were gonna reference a book or two that were perhaps helping you in the current COVID situation. You happen to be in Panama, expatting, so we have a lot of experience to draw from.
So two things. We'll tie them together. Panama has been great. The first year in particular, it's a really vibrant country. There's a lot of digital nomads, a lot of fascinating people, some very cool folks that I had known, but I didn't know in person, that I got to meet when I came down here. So that was the first year. And then, I'm living at a great place with a nice view. I can see all the boats getting ready to go through the canal. And, it was a very exciting break after doing a corporate job for 8 years and then, only having the coaching to focus on. But then with the COVID, we got locked down super hard. So to give you an idea, I know in California, you guys have been locked down about as hard, it's been about as strict as there is in the US.
Yes.
In Panama, for about 5 months, we could only leave out of our apartment, period, whether it be to go exercise, shop, for 4 hours a week. And it was, many articles around the world were written that Panama just so happened to be one of the most, hardcore lockdowns. And so for about 5 months,
yeah,
and they segregated it by gender. So men we got Tuesdays and Thursdays for 2-hour windows based off of our ID, the last number. Women got Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, same thing, their 2-hour window. And it was strange, being kind of stuck in this country. The airports were closed. There were humanitarian flights. It was, in terms of resistance is futile and, surrender is the only option on the menu.
Yes.
It was deep, Misha. I'll tell you, man, there were some dark and fearful moments, as there were around the world, so no monopoly there. And I was lucky in some regards. I was dating a woman who was here also from Thailand, and she was in the same situation. She wasn't working, and she came to visit me. She's the only person I had contact with for that 5 or 6 months. But she'd come over on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, her 2-hour window, and we'd hang out. And it was, looking back, such a beautifully such a beautiful, I use an expression, enjoy the strawberry. May I tell a quick parable that'll kind of bring this home?
Yeah.
All right. I use this with a lot of my clients as well, but and it's referenced later in Enjoy the Strawberry. And there's a monk back in ancient China, and he's walking in the jungle, and he comes upon a tiger, and the tiger notices him and starts chasing after him. And the monk's running and running and running, and the tiger's getting closer and closer. And he comes up on a cliff, and he jumps on the cliff, and he holds onto this vine, and it's like 5,000 feet below. So he's doomed if he lets go. He can't go back up because the tiger's waiting for him. And while he's holding the branch, there's a couple of variations of the story. While he's holding the branch, some mice come out and they start chewing on the vine. And so he's doomed no matter what.
Yeah.
And along the hillside, he notices this beautiful, bright, red, luscious, juicy strawberry. And
Okay.
he pops it in his mouth. And the last line of the poem is, and how sweet it was. And so I use that as a metaphor that nobody gets out of this thing alive. And when I say enjoy the strawberry, it's just be present, enjoy the day.
Yeah.
But the context of, with Saya during that 5 months of lockdown, it was a real blessing to be somewhat trapped. And then the universe, God said, here's the strawberry. Here's something that's going to really make it just lovely and juicy and precious and special. And so that was the silver lining of the whole experience.
And I'm betting that those time blocks that you had together were probably that much sweeter, right?
100%, in ways that you couldn't really imagine unless you were in a pandemic, stuck in a foreign country where you could only hang out for 2 hours, 3 days a week,
That
So
is
yeah, it was.
incredible.
And my sense
Like
is,
you literally could not leave. Airports were shut down. Anyway, go on with your thought. You were gonna.
that's it. You nailed it, man. It's so it was very restrictive, and there were some fearful days because this was all now in retrospect. I look back and about halfway through, I realized what a blessing it was. But for that 5 months, you didn't know if you were coming or going.
Yeah.
There wasn't even the option of going, and there was fears and all that. So
tell me about those fears. Like what? Like what's going through your head?
Well, just what the hell's going on? How do I get back to a safe haven? As much as I love Panama, and it's a great country, it's still not my home. It's not my home country. So there's that sense of, the stability, being around friends and family. And, and it's funny too, in retrospect, I live in a pretty nice, a nice property in the middle of Panama City. And, they opened things up for a bit. And there were moments where I was looking back, kind of wishing it was as quiet as it had been. So the darkest moments ended up being the most peaceful moments in retrospect. But yeah, it was, how do I say? So you asked me about some books. That's what segued into this.
Yeah.
The book that really helped me through that was a book. It's old. It's from the early 1900s, called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And that book helped a lot. So my 2 2-hour windows, I sneak out a little bit early. So my window was from 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. Panama is obviously a very hot country. So I would dip out around 6:30. And, I think that was the first hour that anybody could be out. And I'd walk along the ocean and I'd listen to this book, As a Man Thinketh. And, it's similar to what Mickey Singer talks about, that, much of our experience is, created between our own 2 ears, and, no surprise there. It seems obvious, but then when you peel the onion back layer by layer, you realize that, who are you without your, repetitive thoughts and your habitual patterns and all of that. And so when you're shaken to your, core by, in this case, this experience, kind of having something to sink my teeth into, like that book, was just a godsend. And it was a growth experience. I think, Misha, you and I have known each other for a while. And, there's been some, fears, there's been some loss, there's been the sensation of just being kind of stranded. But as long as you get through it, in a healthy way, it opens up new levels of consciousness, or new levels of gratitude, new levels of appreciation. They say that pain is the, pathway to spiritual development, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that I got through it in one piece, and, the jury's still out, there's still some, chaos. We're back onto a lockdown here, by the way.
Yeah.
So getting through that, where it felt really difficult, was allowed me to kind of practice my own cooking, eat my own cooking, the same things that I hold my clients to in terms of surrender and mindset and routines and waking early and exercise as the ways to kind of navigate the rocky, the turbulent oceans,
So yeah, I love that. So the fears are, I'm just trying to put myself in your circumstance during that time, and I'm thinking things that I would have fear around. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking like, man, like it's awesome being there by choice, but now you don't have choice. And it's like,
Right.
gosh, I could be here forever. Is that kind of it a little
Yeah,
bit?
the illusion of choice, it was, dispelled. So that was quite a profound thing. Yeah, definitely.
How about I'm imagining your coaching stuff probably held steady through that, but was there like, oh my gosh, my finances are going to come unwound and I'm going to end up on the streets? Did it ever get like that sort
Yeah, there were
of?
financial fears. It didn't get that bad, but and clients showed up. I mean, having done it for a while and clients all over the world, literally,
Yeah.
they're it's a fairly high ticket, proposition. So, and I don't do a lot of marketing, so they usually come word of mouth and through some outreach on my part. And it's also a good example of this kind of surrender experiment because they often just show up in the most unexpected places. The
Yeah.
client came on board yesterday. He called me up, and he's the guy that made $1 million. That was his goal, and he was
Yeah.
referred to me by another guy that hit some real high targets and called me up and said, "Hey, coach, you were right. That brand new Porsche that I got didn't really fill the
The
hole.
whole.
The orphanage that I built in Haiti did, and it continues to. So there's this, pretty
Yeah.
cool. So oftentimes the clients come up in unexpected ways. But anyway, there were financial fears, of course, especially about being stranded and about banks and can you get cash and can you get a flight if you need to. So yeah, it was. I have you seen the show Black Mirror on Netflix?
I've seen it. I started one episode and but it looked compelling. But so I need to see more of it. Go ahead, tell me.
I'll just do a broad statement. So it's a dystopian. It's very clever. It's almost like Twilight Zone, but in the future, and it's dystopian and AI run amok and social credit scores and all this stuff. And it's, a lot of A-list actors, a lot of A-list producers and directors. Each one's a vignette, like 45 minutes, and it's just mind-bending. It's really clever.
Yes.
And so somebody put a meme on Facebook that this, meaning the pandemic, was the worst episode of Black Mirror ever. So that was like, wait a second, is this actually real? Because this seems like Black Mirror-ish,
Yeah. So were your parents reaching out to you? I've forgotten the state of your parents. I can't remember if they've passed or
many years ago. My mom's still around, and we would do Zoom calls every Saturday, and we got through it. She had taken a spill, so she's in Oregon, where I grew up, and she had taken a spill shortly before. She was working at a grocery store, took a pretty hard fall, broke some ribs, and punctured her lung.
Ooh.
It was all pre, COVID.
Yeah.
And so there was an extra concern. She was on workman's comp, and there was an extra concern that she couldn't go back because if she got COVID, she had a pre-existing, that would have been bad.
Oh, yeah.
And but she's done great, and our relationship is, it's been good over the last 10 years. We've shared some cool experiences together, but through this pandemic, that's been really cool as well. With Zoom, the world has, for better or worse, become at least more connected on a digital level as a result of the pandemic, which meant, Zoom calls with my mom were,
Yeah. I it's such an interesting, the way that some stuff has been accelerated so much that, I mean, it sounds obvious, of course, but things that maybe were on a 10-year, time frame have just been brought to now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to, I had a conversation last week with a friend, a former client as well. And he's a CEO for a big tech company. It's a bond trading platform, and it does billions of dollars of transactions. And he's super smart, but he's got his hands really deep into technology. And that's exactly what he said, that the speed and the rate of technology is occurring faster than people can keep up. And you remember remember the Palm Pilot, and that was supposed to be the coolest thing, but it was so wonky. and it was so like limited, it's like it
Yes.
was cool in the promise, and maybe had like an IR thing. It seemed like it would be so cool, but it was always just kind of clunky, and it never fulfilled on its promise. And then like
Yes.
5 years ago, technology is not only fulfilled on its promise, now you have like dancing robots and stuff,
Yeah, right. It's insane. It's so
and
freaky.
yeah, so
Well,
it's definitely, unprecedented times. And I'm sure that in many regards, again, for better or worse, and it's always better to, focus on the optimistic, like
yeah.
Diamondis, approach that technology will make things better. Yeah, things are accelerating.
Yeah. I I I I think a good shift that I had was content creation versus content consumption. And so when I was looking at the eyes of, social media, stuff like that, when I was when I'm in consumer mode, that can wreak havoc on my psyche, right? So
Yep.
I some input started coming my way where, hey, get into the content creation side of things, and then you can maybe control the narrative a little bit more in your mind, perhaps. But it was really a profound for me. And I had a very negative opinion of Facebook, Instagram, all these things. And it was actually TikTok that shifted it for me, of all things, because I don't know, I just started finding fun content. Where am I trying to go with this? I think if I look for the good, it's to emphasize your point that if you look for the good is there, and then the good multiplies. And so that's really what I've been trying to focus on, like focus on the positive narrative and add to that narrative. And now all of a sudden social media is a place of wonder for me.
Yeah, man.
And
Cool. Have you heard the quote, "That which we appreciate appreciates"?
yeah, I love that.
Yeah, cool, man.
Yeah.
It seems, I just stumbled across that recently, but yeah, man, if you have a choice, and obviously there are lots of, commentary on social media, this and that, but yeah, given a choice, you should always choose the, the optimistic path, because that's
Yeah.
enjoying the strawberry, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Trying to think what else I had another thought run through my brain in regards to all that. Maybe it'll come back around, but I was just remembering that you have a sister. So how's it going with the sister?
Fine. Yeah, she's good. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. You guys are communicating on and off. Like, it's funny. I would tell you, I think about my brother. I think about my relationship with my brother, who I love my brother. He's a dear man. But I can always look at other people's relationships and be like, oh, they communicate once a week or once a day or once a month. And my brother, who I have tremendous love for, we just don't have that relationship. So depending on what filter I'm looking at it through, I can feel like, oh, it's the best thing ever. Or if I'm in compare mode, I'm like, well, anyway, go on. I'll let you
Yeah,
answer.
no, everything's good. So, we're all kind of spread out over the world and the country. So,
Yeah. So you when was the first time you like embraced the travel bug?
it's a great question. Wow, man. So, 16 years old, well, 12 years old, we moved from Portland, the big city, the mean streets of Portland.
Yes.
Um, each day I'd go outside, I didn't know what I'd experience. It could have been, littering, some jaywalkers, man. God, the jaywalkers. Whew. Portland. And then we moved from the mean streets of Portland to the streets of Tigard. And I was 12 at that time. It was a bit, I was kind of coming into my own, and at that age, 12, and I had my group of friends. And Portland's a great city. I mean, it was very diverse and multicultural, and it was just a great place to grow up, Southwest Portland. And so I moved to the suburbs of Tigard, and it was only like 9 miles away, but it could have been the moon for all intents and purposes. You know, it was very different. It was far enough away. Obviously, I was, you know, young. I didn't have transportation. And there was always this longing to, you know, be back in Portland. So when I was 16, there was a shift. You know, I did have wheels. And so I, you know, would really look into these adventures of going back into the city. And, you know, there was this underage nightclub we'd go to. I reconnected with an old friend. And so we'd go into the city and go to the Depot nightclub. And, you know, I met a girl and had my first girlfriend. And so that was my first sense of like adventure, you know, leaving Tigard to go 9 miles back into Portland was probably where that bug was established, that, hey, if you're willing to, you know, spread your wings a little bit, you can have an entirely different experience. And then when I was 20, I moved to Michigan, Flint, for a short time with a friend. Then shortly after that to Washington, D.C., where I lived for about a decade. I went to college there. I worked on Capitol Hill. And, you know, again, you could just change. And that was a surrender experiment without realizing it, happenstance. I didn't want to go back to Portland. I had family on the East Coast. You know,
and some wild stories in Washington, right? Like, you don't have to tell me any, but I know that I mean, there's some wild stuff going down in Washington.
A wild city. And I'm lucky on, you know, working on Capitol Hill, working with some just fascinating people. And this would have been in the late 90s. And then DC itself is quite a big, complicated city. Very also super multicultural, you know, Ethiopian restaurants, and just very, very dynamic and very cool. So, and it was good. You know, I just kind of went where the path unfolded. And it was pretty interesting too. The job that I took in San Diego was as a result of a friendship that was formed when I was 20. We used to work at the Cheesecake Factory in DC, and 4 or 5 friends that I still keep in contact with. We go back to the incoming class Cheesecake Factory, really cool place to work. It was young people, and there was like 100 servers, and, you know, all of us were young and up to something. And man, some of the things that people have done from that point in time is very cool. So that was, you know, following the breadcrumbs to new and, you know, varied adventures. And then here's a pretty cool story about the travel bug. So my godfather, when I was probably 8 or 10 years old, he was my dad's best friend. They grew up together in Virginia. And again, I speak to him very regularly. He had come and stayed with us after he did a 1-year trip around the world in the 80s. And he had all the stories, and just, he was in Russia, he was in Thailand, and all these adventures. And so that seed stuck with me. So when I was in Maryland, DC, Rich lived in Virginia, and we'd talk regularly. And I was living in a home that had belonged to the former mayor of DC. It was this cool mansion, and just like the series of events. But anyway, they sold it or something happened. So I had to get an apartment, and I had to buy, you know, the stuff that you get when you buy an apartment or rent an apartment, like shower curtains. And it just so happened the shower curtain that I got, which I didn't put much thought into it, was a map of the world.
Okay.
And just, I wouldn't think about it, but each day I would take a shower. I was working for a company, Kaiser Permanente, as a senior sales rep. And each morning I would take a shower, and the seed was already there, but it started to kind of gestate and grow of taking a trip around the world. And each morning I'd take a shower, and I'd be like, I'd start over here in Ecuador, and then I'd go to the Galapagos Islands, and I'd go to Machu Picchu, and then I'd go to And each day would be different, but each day I'd be taking a shower thinking about where on the planet I would want to go. If I just took a year to backpack. And that's where I had a couple tickets to Ecuador that I just blew off. They were like $200, and it was early in the year in 2006. So with the change of the seasons and this and that, by the time I was really ready to make my jump, it was going to be springtime in Europe. So I ended up getting a one-way ticket to Casablanca, Morocco. And I flew there with no plan. A buddy of mine arranged it while I was in flight. He was from there. So his mom, this was all unplanned. His mom picked me up at the airport. She didn't speak a lick of English. I didn't speak French or Arabic, but I stayed there for a week, and they treated me like their own family because I was good friends with their son, who I'm still good friends with. And what an adventure. And it was like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, you know, the bazaars and the souks and the camels and the spices, you know, I mean, it was very exotic, and that was my jump off. And so, you know, that ended up, I did a 1-year trip. I stuck mostly with my plan that I had mapped out on that shower curtain. And so, yeah, that gives a lot, that, you know, the travel bug has been there and been exercised to the fullest.
Yes.
And I think that siren call came a calling after 8 years of being in San Diego, which is what led me to Panama. In retrospect, at a point you realize there's a cool quote about coming back to the point you started and seeing it for in a different way for the first time, or seeing it from different eyes for the first time, something along those lines. So I have probably my behind has literally circumnavigated the globe and pretty darn close to the ground. I mean, the only flights really were either north, south, or across oceans. So
Yeah.
I've seen a lot, man. Yep.
Tell me the top 1, 2, 3, or 4 people of note or experience that you've met outside of the United States.
Oh, wow. Gosh. Okay, here's a cool story. I was in Russia and was staying in St. Petersburg. I had flown there kind of on a lark. I'd been in Turkey, and I had flown up there just because, and I wanted to do the Trans-Siberian. And it was September, and you had to have a visa. So getting the visa to Russia and to China took some doing. I was in Greece when I got those 2 things arranged. And so I flew to St. Petersburg, and there weren't really like travelers hotels and hostels. They just are like, they don't really exist there. So the hotels were really expensive. And the first night I got there, I didn't have much of a plan, and I had my backpack, and it was pretty cold. St. Petersburg's a beautiful city, by the way, but it's pretty far north. And so I ended up spending like 150 euro or whatever was the equivalent per night for the first couple nights, until I met some Americans, and they showed me this secret hostel, and I stayed there.
Yes.
And then one day I'm walking around, and there's this big, beautiful church. I think it's called Isaac's Cathedral or Kaczynski Cathedral. I can't remember. It's one of those two. There was all these limos, and there was all this parade, and like tens of thousands of people.
Wow.
And so let me just see what's going on. And
you stumble upon this.
I stumble upon it, and okay. I walk into the church, and I'm there, and apparently it is the reinterment of the wife of the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II. He, after the Bolshevik Revolution, all this crazy stuff happened. All the royal families were kind of intermarried. His wife, I believe, was from Denmark, and her name was Maria Fedoranova, something like that. And her wish, so she boogied back to Denmark when stuff hit the fan. But her wish was 100 years to the date of the time that she had left was to be returned to what she considered her new homeland. And so that's what was going on. And in that cathedral where I was, were all the royal families, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church. I'm sure Putin was there.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I stumbled into. And also a couple of days later, I was at the Hermitage with a group of the same friends. And the Crown Prince of Denmark was there. There's this clock made probably 500 years ago with this owl, and it's very intricate. And we're in the same room with this Crown Prince of Denmark and his wife from Australia. And people can Google it. It's a famous story. They met at the Olympics. It's kind of like a princess story. And so that would be one of the cooler experiences that I had in terms of people of note. When I was in China, I got to know some pretty interesting people. There's a pretty well-known stem cell guy here in Panama that Mel Gibson goes to. Many, many people go to. I met him through a friend in China. What else? I had a lot of job links, where I'd bump into the same person.
Yeah.
Okay. Last story. It's not a noteworthy person, but it's a person that had a big impact in my life. So I went to Morocco, toured around Morocco for a couple of weeks, went through Gibraltar into Spain, and I was in Madrid. So this was pretty early in the 1-year trip around the world. And I go into my hostel, and this guy, it's like 8 beds or whatever. And this guy kind of pops his head up and say, "Hey, how you doing? What's your name?" "Claudio." "Where are you from?" "Argentina." "Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Adam. I'm from the States." And we just strike up a nice conversation. Later that evening, we go out with a group of about 10 or 12 of us. And we hit the town, and me and Claudio meet a couple women from Mexico, and we go to a dance club, and we go to have breakfast, and we're just kind of hanging out. And then we plan on meeting up in Barcelona like a week later. But as often happens, our paths didn't reconnect. It was the day before iPhones and cell phones and all that. So,
Sure.
So fast forward about 3 months. I'm in Amsterdam that morning. I was there for a few weeks. World Cup was in full bore going on in 2006, which was hosted in Germany. I had been avoiding Germany because I didn't want to deal with the chaos of all the hooligans, and World Cup's a whole other, it's on another level.
It's the next level.
Next level, and international next level. But anyway, that morning I wake up and I say, I got to get out of Amsterdam. So I get my Eurail pass, I book a hostel to Berlin. I get on the train, go to Berlin, check into my hostel, put my bag, where in my room or in the hostel room. And I go out for a walk, and I'm going to this art gallery. It's a very serene, peaceful evening. Check out this gallery that's pretty cool. And I have no real set plan. I'm just taking in this new city. And then I go to get a kebab, these Turkish kebab shops, which are all over Europe, outdoors. And I'm there, and I look over my shoulder, and who do I see? Claudio.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Claudio. He's like, Adam. And it was so cool, Misha, because we're good friends to this very day. We've seen each other all over the world. I went to visit him in Argentina a couple of years ago in 2014. But being an Argentinian, these folks, like, soccer is a religion to them.
Yeah.
They had a hookup. So they got me a ticket. There's a guy named Diego who I'm still friends with, and Claudio. And I was with the Argentinian contingent. They got me a ticket to go to a quarterfinal match in Berlin, in the same stadium that Jesse Owens showed up Hitler, where Germany and Argentina faced off in a quarterfinals match. And I got to go with these, just amazing fans.
Footballers.
And with Maradona. I mean, he was there. And so, here's, bringing it full circle into God winks and serendipity and surrender. What happens when we're isolated or we stay in our same spot and we just kind of calcify into our routines, it cuts off a lot of the possibility. And so it's something to watch out for given the state of affairs, because people really have been locked down. But on the opposite of that, when you throw caution to the wind and you have a one-way ticket to someplace and you don't even know what's going to happen after you arrive, it really opens up the possibility for God, the cosmic consciousness, the flying spaghetti monster, God winks, happenstance, whatever you want to call it, to show up. And it seems that it shows up very frequently when we get over our fears and we take that leap of faith and we put ourselves out there. And, a lot of people just don't have that experience because, fear is a heavy taskmaster,
Yeah, for sure. I thought that was running through my head was, having traveled the world and done things like that, there's plenty of shenanigans that could have happened along the way. I'm speaking for you. Huh?
So thanks. Go on. Yeah.
Yes. So I think I'm being easy on you and not pressing you for some good shenanigan stories. And I would think that traveling like that and there's going to be moments of, what have I gotten myself into, perhaps, and you can address that if you want, but I would also say moments of clarity, or those bitch slap moments when you're in another country and it's like you have that moment of awareness or clarity, and maybe it's coming from some pain.
Yeah, man. Well, you just gave me a softball. It's somewhat personal, but I've shared it before. So I think you may even be alluding to it in the setup, but I'll indulge. I'll take a swing. So
thank you.
So the 1 year trip around the world, there was probably a lot of shenanigans, but I was young enough and each day was different that it really didn't seem to be pronounced. I mean, literally going from, Marrakesh to Casablanca to Gibraltar to Madrid to Barcelona to Istanbul. I mean, it's just, you're in perpetual motion. And so things start to kind of, the idea of shenanigans, there's so much out of the ordinary anyway, like a shenanigan is all relative,
Well, I think you should highlight that, because that's pretty awesome, right? It sounds like it's almost the state of travel, right? It's
Yeah. And it's, but there's a certain level of there's a certain level of stability. It's almost like riding a bike, that as long as it's in perpetual motion, it stays in perpetual motion. So there wasn't a whole lot that seemed like, they weren't the bitch slaps that I'm about to share with you, which did occur some years later. And, I'm sure if I look back, I kept a blog during the course of this, and people, this was, 2006. So, I have all this documented, shenanigans and otherwise.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
but it was really cool, mostly in terms of the people and the serendipities and the God winks and the sights and, all the, the museums and, the bumping into guys like Claudio and World Cup and, blah, blah, blah. But after being in China for a few years, I went down to.
So you lived in China for a while, yes?
I was in China for about 4 years.
Okay.
And I really wanted to have a business experience rather than just being, an expat that taught English and, didn't learn the language. So I made it a point to do business there and learn the language. Two difficult things. And my language, it's not great because it's a hard language, and I'm not great, with languages to begin with. But I can communicate in Mandarin, and I got to do business. I worked with a Turkish company doing export and, shipping containers and all of that. And so that was really cool. But my visa ran out. So it was 2010. I decided to go to Thailand, and I was going to go there to regroup. And mind you, I probably stayed longer in China than I otherwise would have because of the financial crisis. And China did a better job weathering the storm. They injected a bunch of capital and things were relatively stable, where America from 2008 to 2010, there was a lot of uncertainty.
Sure.
So in China, 2010, I go to Taiwan for a month. Then I go to Thailand to work with some guy on stem cells. I mentioned the guy here in Panama, and there was another company in Bangkok, friend of mine that, operated. But anyway, that didn't really come to be. So I was island hopping, and I was going to get my dive master. And anyway, long story short, which is, was a profound life-changing experience, is there's an island called Koh Phi Phi. And it's beautiful. The movie The Beach was filmed there. It's got these like limestone islands that jut out of the ocean and that turquoise clear water. And anyway, and I stayed in that town for about a month. In fact, one of the bars was owned by a guy. I didn't know him at the time, but we went to the same high school in Portland, Oregon, in the same district, Wilson, and just total serendipity and on the other side of the planet. But there was a bar called the Reggae Bar, and in the Reggae Bar was a boxing ring. And so if patrons got inebriated enough, they could go in the ring and duke it out with one another. And what could possibly go wrong? In fact, Chuck Liddell, this is within the last couple of years, who's a famous UFC fighter, did a live stream from there not too long ago. And I've told this story many times. So I went there and I kind of entertained the idea, and I'd watch the stupid foreigners get there and, bloody each other up. And, I boxed as a kid. That was kind of my jam from age 7 to 16 on and off. And so, and I'm a huge boxing fan. I've met Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali. I'm still involved. When I can, I go to the events that are up in the States, and I've got some good friends, one who's a world champion right now. So anyway, I'm out having a little libation over several hours. And I'm with this group of Americans and this British woman, and we're hanging out, and they're college students, and I was 30. I was in my mid 30s at that time. So they're like, hey, about the Reggae Bar and the boxing ring? I'm like, yeah, let's go. So we get each other all worked up, and we go over there. And one thing leads to another, and the matchmaker comes up with this big Irish guy, and he's younger than me. He's taller than me. He's more muscular. He's pretty fit. And so we're going to go duke it out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, sounds good. I've been wanting to do it. I've kind of committed myself. And so he goes to, they give us the gear, the headgear, or whatever. They give us the boxing gloves, the shin protector thingies. He goes to get a mouth guard, which is an absolute must in any kind of combat sport. You knock your teeth out otherwise. I'm like, I don't need one of those. And so I'm warming up, and while I'm doing it, I kind of roll my ankle, and I get a moment of clarity that this is probably not a good idea. It was like an out-of-body experience that, Adam, maybe this isn't such a good idea. So my ego, of course, would not allow me to back out. So my strategy was to get him to back out. So I walk up to him and I said, hey, I want to give you fair warning. I've been boxing since I was 7 years old. And you're like a nice guy. You're getting in way over your head. So as a gentleman, I'm going to give you a nice, easy opportunity just to bow out. Exit stage left, and we'll have a beer and everything will be gravy. It almost worked. His eyes get really big. And he's like, turns to his friends. He's like, he's going to kick my ass. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And then his friends talk him into it. He's like, nah, fuck it, let's do it. I'm like, damn, it didn't work. So anyway, that strategy failed. So anyway, we're in the ring. First round goes off. And, I'm inside. And even though I was somewhat inebriated, I relied on the experience since I was a kid. And I'm inside and, landing some shots and close enough that he isn't really landing any. And then the second round goes off. And, I'm pretty tired at that point. Anybody that knows, as an amateur, you box 3 2-minute rounds.
Yeah.
Just try 1 2-minute round. It's going to kick your behind. Like these pros go, it's just very, very highly conditioned.
Gosh.
So anyway, second round goes off. Long story short, there's 2 rules that keep some modicum of safety, and that is no elbows and no knees. So they've been doing this long enough. They know the foreigners mess each other most elbows and knees. And, they can just look goofy. Well, I break the first rule. Like I do like a knee somewhere, and that gives him justification to break the second rule, which is an elbow over my eyebrow, and he does it 3 times. And all of a sudden I can't see. I'm like, what the hell happened? Blood's dripping from my brow. They stop the fight. The barmaid comes in with the, a towel that turns red immediately. And that's a debacle. You want a shenanigan and a debacle?
Yeah.
There, I gave you your shenanigan and debacle.
And
was that the end of it? No, it was just the beginning. Okay. So after that, he and I are having a beer together, right? He's Irish, I'm Irish and American, and that's just what we do. We mess each other up, and then we get drunk after. And so he buys me a beer. I'm like, hey, man, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have tried to kick you with the knee or whatever. He's like, yeah, I shouldn't have hit you with the elbow. Yeah, let me buy you a beer. So I go to buy him a beer after he bought me the first beer, and I realize, oh, hey, I don't have my wallet, my passport, this necklace that my mom had given me, a ring that had belonged to my dad, my key card to get into the hotel. I had nothing. And that group, they did not wait around. And I throw a few sheets to the wind. So I'm looking everywhere for them. And it dawns on me, I'm in a foreign country on an island with no identification, no money. I don't even have a key to get back into my hotel. We didn't have like a reception area, so it was like, it was slowly dawning on me. I was totally screwed. And so the next 2 or 3 hours, I'm walking up and down the streets. There's like a bar street or whatever, and pretty lively. And I'm trying to find these people first of all, which they're nowhere to be found. And I'm also trying to get some help because I got this big gash over my brow, get cleaned and stitched, or it's going to either get infected or create a big scar. So nothing's working, and it just over 2 or 3 hours, I'm sobering up and I'm realizing I'm totally screwed. Thailand is not a very friendly place. Like with the police, if you're interacting with them, usually they're shaking you down for something. It's a general rule. And so I stumble in looking like a hot mess into this kiosk, this police kiosk, and there's a cop. He's got his legs up on the table, on his desk, and a walkie-talkie and his cigarettes or whatever. And he speaks English, and I he could tell, something was wrong just from me walking in the door. But he had a moment of grace, and I told him what had happened, and his wheels are, turning, and he tells me, he's like, you're pretty drunk. You wouldn't, even if we could help you, you wouldn't be able to identify these folks. And I'm like, no, we hung out for several hours, and I definitely would. And he pauses, and all of a sudden, God's unseen hand comes in. He calls the walkie-talkie, another cop who comes up on his motorbike, takes me to the hospital. They know I don't have any money, waits for me while I get cleaned up and stitched up. Then we go back to the first bar, the reggae bar. There's a woman named Pon, who I'm still friends with to this very day, who was the waitress. And they speak in Thai. And all of a sudden, as a group, we go over to this other Irish bar. They knew exactly where they were going. There's that group. We get all my stuff back, and they're like, oh, we were holding it for you. And I'm like, I don't, whatever, all the power.
Whatever. Just give it to me.
Just give it to me. And I even went to give the cop 1,000 baht note, which is like 30 or 40 bucks. He wouldn't take it. So it was really this moment of divinity, of grace, and it was a life-changing experience for me. And that woman, Pon, she helped me out. I had to get some medication for my eye, and over the next 2 or 3 days. And anyway, it was just this moment of, it was a nice coup de grace, piece de resistance, whatever the French word is for the end of that chapter was over. Yeah. And from there I went to Bangkok. I ended up getting everything situated to come back to the US. Shortly after that is when I moved to San Diego and met you. So it was one of those, didn't plan it, wouldn't have planned it, didn't work out well, but it was the best thing that ever could have happened.
Thank you for sharing that story, Adam. I
Yeah,
appreciate it very much. I love
were you leading the witness on that. Were you going in that direction?
Yeah. I was hoping for something like that, or that story for sure. You blessed. I feel like that is such a great story. And I think you, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the word, but you downplayed the intensity of it a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
But I think anybody listening would have a feel for what was going down. Yeah, it's beautiful and a great, moment of poignancy and change and next steps.
Life's never been the same since. I mean, it was a real opportunity to kind of shift gears and appreciate some things and do some things differently. Absolutely. Mish, I do have a call coming up. So
Okay.
Did you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I do. Absolutely. So, yes. Why don't you tell people how they can find you if they'd like to hear about expat'ing and or some coaching or what have you?
Yeah, my website is wakingearly.com, which, a big part of my coaching philosophy is the first keystone habit is waking early, create some found time, stack some habits on top of that, and then get some accountability around that one thing that makes everything else easier and necessary. So it's an easy domain to remember, wakingearly.com, goes to the same place as my coaching website. And that's the best way to get in touch. Also, you can email me at adam@wakingearly.com. And that's how people can get in touch.
Fantastic, Adam. Thank you so much for indulging us in the stories and just being a powerful influence in my life and just being a growth charger, my friend.
Amen, brother. Love you, Mish. Talk to you soon.
Love you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for spending time with me today. As someone who is committed to growth and service to this world, I so appreciate your willingness to come with me, go within, and serve our world through change. If you found value in this podcast and you know someone who can use this message, share this episode with them. Share it so our mission can be achieved one episode at a time. And of course, subscribe so you can hear more. And lastly, for more resources on what has helped me on my journey and can help you on yours, go to belove.media/resources. That's BELOVE.media/resources. Thank you again for listening.